When it comes to choosing the right pot size for your succulents, there's official generic advice that states the pot should be about 10% bigger than the diameter of your succulent. And to be frank, it is a decent piece of advice and can be used for not just succulents but other plants as well. However, it's kind of a rigid advice that doesn't consider diverse growing environments succulents find themselves in. As a baseline, it's useful but can be improved upon. The real world can sometimes have slightly different demands based on the environment, the type of succulent, seasons and your particular climate. In this video, we'll have a look at how all of those things can have a bearing on the size of the pot. But first, let's have a look at how the 10% rule works. The 10% rule will be fine to follow a lot of the time. If you don't feel like watching this whole deep dive into choosing the perfect pot size, you can stop here and go with this advice. This is a super rough sketch and not to size, but it should be clear enough to explain. Say your succulent is about 10 cm across. The perfect pot size would be roughly 11 cm in diameter. The same will apply to the depth of the pot. You'll need to add 10% to the current depth. This all sounds simple enough, and it would be simple enough in a perfect world. But you will often not find a pot that is exactly 10% bigger than your succulent may need according to the 10% rule. To be honest, it doesn't need to be exactly 10%. If you cannot find a pot that's exactly 10% bigger, don't stress about it. The succulent won't really care if it's 10 or 20%. I usually go from 10 cm to 12 and there are no adverse effects. The succulents are just fine. I guess what the 10% rule aims to achieve is to give a rough estimate so you don't bang your plants into pots that are absolutely huge. This may sometimes cause problems, especially with succulents that are sensitive to overwatering. Planting in pots that are way too big can also waste nutrients as they tend to get washed away long before the plant's roots will get to them. However, there are circumstances where planting into much bigger pots can be advantageous, and we will get to that in a bit. First, I want to show you what I do at my nursery. This is how I upgrade and decide the size of pots for my plants. A lot of my succulents start off in plugs that are 3 cm. They then progress into a 6 cm pot, although I do sometimes go from 3 to 10, usually during spring or with fast growing succulents. This is 10 cm pot, and once the plants are root bound there, I make a jump to this quite deep 12 cm pot. So as you can see, I don't quite stick to the 10% rule and more often than not get a much bigger pot. But one of the reasons this works for me well is our very mild succulent friendly climate. Because of the lovely climate here, my succulents grow almost all year round and can be kept outdoors at all times. For those of you new to my channel, I'm in Sydney area in Australia. Thanks to these often perfect conditions, succulents here will grow at a much faster rate than in climates with very cold winters. As a result, it can be better to go for pots that are bigger than the 10%, simply because most succulents will grow into them in no time before getting very root bound. But in climates where the growing season is shorter and succulents need to be brought in for winter due to frost and snow, the 10% rule may be pretty spot on as a guide. As I said earlier, it doesn't have to be exactly 10%, but big jumps may just be a waste of potting mix, and you could be inviting fungal diseases as well if your plants don't have time to grow into all of that space. The conclusion here is that if you have a long growing season, you can comfortably use bigger pots. If it's short, it may be for the best to stick to the 10% rule as much as possible. Most succulents grow rapidly during spring once it warms up. If you still experience snow or frost in the springtime, the growth may be delayed. If I use big pots that are well above the 10%, sometimes close to 50% or more, it will be during spring. I know the pot will get filled pretty fast in spring, and so I don't bother with small pots that are only 10% bigger and would have to be repotted anyway in another couple of months. Technically, I could just use the smaller pots and have my succulents root bound for a bit, but because I run a nursery, I need them to get big to either sell or to produce offsets I can then propagate. So it really depends on what you want from your plants. If you'd like them to get big and grow pups, then bigger size pots may be the way to go. Some succulents grow faster than others. There's very little point in using huge pots for slowly growing smaller types. But succulents that grow rapidly can suffer and start losing leaves if they don't have enough growing space. With fast-growing succulents, you can skip ahead to even 50% increase in the size of the pot. Some can very much dislike being root bound, and if you only upgrade it 10% at a time, you'd be up for a lot of repotting. When we're expecting a hot and dry warm season, I tend to use bigger pots. The reason is that bigger pots heat up slower and can help plants cope with the heat. Small pots that are 10 cm or less heat up in no time and can sometimes contribute to a death of a succulent, especially if the pot is blasted by hot direct sun. When we experience heat waves of over 40 degrees Celsius, succulents in big pots always fare better, and those that are planted in the garden and mulch are the least affected. This, I think, is because their roots are nice and cool. If you try and touch a dark colored pot that has been sitting in direct sun during those kinds of temperatures, you could pretty much suffer a minor burn. During rainy season, I do the opposite and tend to go for smaller pots. The reason is that when it's very wet, fungi thrive, and when there's a lot of fresh potting mix just sitting there, they can get in easier. Once it does get in, it's also harder to eradicate, as it can be difficult to get everything dried up. Fungicides should kill it, but continued wet weather tends to make it persevere and spread. Don't get me wrong, even root-bound plants can get fungus in soil, but it's nowhere near as prolific or common. The last thing I have to say about choosing the right size is that if you only grow a few succulents for fun, they'll probably be just fine if you follow the 10% rule roughly. But if you collect or want to sell your succulents, you may want to consider all of the other points as well to help your succulents look the best. And that's it for today. I hope this video was useful, and if you'd like to add anything or ask a question, you can do so in the comments below. To learn more about succulents, you can hit the subscribe button or go to our website succulentgrowingtips.com. Thank you very much for watching.